Hello, and a very warm welcome to Cultural Communication Confidence with me, Victoria Reynoldson. And I'm really glad to be back talking about a topic that I know I get asked about quite a lot. And in fact, it came up again with a client just the other day. And that topic is all about how to be assertive, but not aggressive. And it got me thinking that this is a really important topic in the workplace today. Communication is so critical to our success. It's so critical to your performance, to achieving your goals and your results. Your communication is how you get things done, and yet it can be misinterpreted, misunderstood. So, this idea of what is assertive and being seen as confident and a leader versus what is being aggressive is a really important point that I wanted to unpack here in this episode. But why? Why might that be a tension? What might be going on? Well, clearly, the most important thing to recognize is it's not just a two-sided question. It's not one thing or the other. In fact, I want to reframe this for you. I want you to think about it like a spectrum with extreme assertiveness on one side and extreme aggressiveness on the other. And where you sit along that spectrum will completely depend on the context, the situation, and the people that you're interacting with. You will have a center of gravity, a place where you tend to go, but you will be somewhere around that area. Equally, the people in your team, in your organization, will have their centers of gravity too. So, what determines that? Well, I think that's a great question. And the first factor that I want to draw your attention to, of course, is cultural. Culture is a big part of how I think about communication in a global leadership context. The way that we communicate, we interact, we show up is driven by cultural factors. And so some of those that might impact this particular topic include the power dynamics, power distance, as it's sometimes called. So, for example, if you're in a team or an organization that has high power distance, that might mean there is more assertiveness, certainly more potentially more aggressiveness from people top down. Another dynamic that you might want to think about is how direct the communication style is of others around you. Clearly, if somebody has more of a direct communication style, that might mean they're not afraid to say what they mean. They might be very happy to give you directly what they think, even if that is a negative message or they're disagreeing or giving you even personal feedback. Which, if you come from a culture and your comfort zone is within indirect communication, then you might experience that as aggressive. Even from their perspective, they think they're being assertive. So, this is an interesting dynamic. Another cultural factor might be around how competitive an environment is. There might be organizations you're working in, industries, even the team that you're in, where competition is a natural part of what people do. And that might lend itself to more aggressive behaviors and communication interactions. So think about this. What are the cultural dynamics that you are influencing you and how you show up? What are the ones that are influencing others in your team and how they come across to you? It's always about perception. Another important factor clearly is about gender. Now, there are many studies that talk about the gendered nuances of assertiveness. And certainly, studies have shown that if two people, a man and a woman, are expressing themselves with similar levels of assertiveness, that might be interpreted in different ways. A man tends to be interpreted as being more assertive in a positive light, and women tend to be interpreted or perceived as more aggressive, even though they may be communicating in a very similar way. So, this is something we have to be conscious of, how we're interpreting others around us. I also want to touch on there is a difference between written and verbal communication. When we're being assertive in verbal communication, there are other ways that people interpret that, not through just what we're saying, but how we're saying it, through body language and tone of voice. But in writing, all of those elements are stripped away. So, what you might think is just a quick message because you're busy, a short one liner, might be interpreted as aggressive by others, that you're not taking the care to write to them properly or ask them how they are. Whether that's on email or on quick messenger platforms, we have to be conscious that sometimes when we're being assertive, asking for things, we're being quick and efficient, that could be interpreted in different ways. That dynamic and spectrum of assertive to aggressive. And then finally, there is our confidence. This might be a factor for you if you are feeling a bit exposed in certain contexts, meetings, or with certain people. Maybe you are feeling not so confident in front of senior leadership teams or because of a particular issue that's coming up. And our confidence plays into this question as well. I've found in my work with my clients that the more confidence challenges somebody's experiencing in a moment, the more they're questioning themselves. Am I being assertive enough? How do I make sure that I'm not coming across and spilling over into aggressiveness? So this is why this is such a big topic for us to unpack. And I'm going to come up with some potential approaches that I think will be very powerful for you to try out if you are experiencing this right now. But before we do, I just want to mention that I have a resource to accompany this podcast, which is called Global Leader Impact and is absolutely all about these types of leadership topics. This is a completely free training to you, sending you a short video in your inbox for 5 days, which you can access at any time. If you'd like to get hold of that, then please feel free to go to www.culturecuppa.com/leader, and I'll put that link in the show notes. But coming back to approaches, if we are questioning ourselves around this topic, how do we make sure we're not being too aggressive? How do we make sure we're being assertive enough? I want to give you 5 key areas for you to think about so that you can move forward on this topic, so you know you're being assertive enough and not too aggressive. Now, when you think about a specific meeting that you are going to, and maybe this is the question that's coming up in your mind, often I find people get very stuck in, well, what's the objective? What's the objective of this meeting? I want you to, of course, have that clear in your mind, but I also want you to move now into your intention. And this is particularly important when we're thinking about how do we come across, how do we connect to other people? Because when we think about our intention, we're thinking about what is the relationship dynamic? What is it we want to achieve in the interaction between people in that meeting? It also forces you to recognize if there has been any historic context to this meeting. So maybe the concern about being too aggressive is that you've had some meetings already and they haven't gone so well. They have ended up being quite heated and in strong disagreement or confrontation. So if that's a context for you, then one of the things that I like to frame for you is that we need to find a way to pause and put down the emotional baggage. That emotional baggage is heavy. And if we are carrying that around from meeting to meeting and bringing it from also historic meetings into the current context, that can cause us challenges. So think about the intention, put down that emotional baggage, and it will help you to move forward. Also, think about your expectations. Think about what is the power dynamic in the room? What is happening with the cultural factors, and how are others operating maybe slightly differently from how you are? Think about what you might need to adapt or adjust in your style to be more successful, to be seen as assertive but not aggressive. This key piece, cultural intelligence, is really core to my work as well, and a really critical part of global leaders being successful, understanding how they adjust that scale. Now, if confidence is your challenge, then I highly encourage you to think about next your value. One of the things that people question in situations when they're doubting themselves and when they are worried about how others are receiving them, particularly with power dynamics, is that they're questioning, what is the value that I'm bringing here? Am I the right person to express this? And it's also particularly true if you've got one opinion which is completely different from others in the room. And so the question you'll be asking yourself is, do I put my hand up and say something different here? Do I go against the grain and push and resist against the flow of the majority here? And I want you to come back to, why were you hired? What was the value that the organization and your team saw in you? When you have those doubts and questions running through your mind, what you can come back to is reminding yourself that you have great strengths. You have really amazing value to bring because of your skills, your experience. You have value to bring because of your qualifications and what is in your head. So I really want you to recognize this. You have value to bring. And even if you have an opposing view, your opinion counts. And so expressing that isn't aggressive, it can be assertive. And we'll talk about how to do that in a minute, but confidence requires coming back to recognizing your value, the value that you bring. The next area is your messaging. Now, messaging is it's a topic that I've talked about quite a lot on this podcast. And I really have a strong view that we need to know what we want to say, have that clarity on what is the most important point or 2 to 3 points that we want to land. Because if we don't have that clarity, that's when we tend to move into over explaining, trying to push, but without really making it clear about why our view is different from others. So consider what are your main messages, what it is you want to say in that meeting. And particularly if you know already what you're going to say is different from other people in the meeting, you want to be very clear about what it is you're saying and why. Why does it benefit the team, the organization to think about it in this way? Finally, in this area, I really do encourage, particularly those of you listening to this podcast, as some of my clients are, who are technical experts, engineers working in R&D functions, or like lawyers or accountants. If you're in a specialist area and you're in a context perhaps either internally or maybe it's externally with customers or partners where they are not from your specialist area, you need to be able to explain things and speak the same language as a business. You need to be able to frame your ideas in a way that others understand. So, move away from the acronyms and the jargon and really have that clarity about how you're going to explain things. So you're not pushing with your ideas, but people are not understanding it. In some of these situations, I've seen people get frustrated and then spill into aggressiveness with their explaining. And then finally, I want to talk to you about signaling assertiveness. I think this is a really interesting topic, and I love the idea that we can demonstrate to people overtly, but also subtly, that we are being assertive, but certainly not aggressive. And the first part of this is thinking about what you say. And I was reminded about this recently. In fact, it was something I was saying, interestingly, that somebody gave me some feedback on. And I realized that sometimes we forget to remove the minimizing words, to remove the words that say, well, I'm quite sure about this, or I potentially think. These sound uncertain. They don't sound assertive in our language. And so that reminder was very timely to me. And coming back to how we move through it, it's thinking about flagging phrases that show your confidence, your certainty in what you're saying, and help bring people along with you without sounding aggressive at all. So, for example, you can use phrases like, what I truly believe is, or the most important thing here is, or if there's one thing I want you to take away from today, it is. Can you see or hear how strong those phrases sound? This type of flagging a language is really important. And I encourage you, if you're in that space of wanting to come across as assertive, to think about how you frame the views that you're sharing. From language, I next want you to think about your body language, your nonverbal communication. If you want to be assertive, think about how are you sitting or standing if it's that's the context. How are you moving your hands? How are you leaning into the conversation literally and physically? We can demonstrate so much from our body language. So if you want to show that assertiveness, think about how you could demonstrate that through your body language. And then finally, there is your tone of voice. Tone of voice, again, is a good indicator about where somebody is at. Even if the words say one thing, our voice can betray our true feelings. So if you're feeling frustrated, if you're feeling starting to get into that emotional baggage coming back in, that aggressiveness may come out in your voice, even if you don't mean it to. I feel that with our tone of voice as well, we need to think about aspects like volume and pace. So, if confidence is your challenge, then recognize that you need to make sure that you're speaking loudly enough so people can hear you. And that, by the way, can be a cultural challenge as well. I do recognize that. And also pace. You want to sound energetic and energized without speaking too fast, which may come across as nervous, or too slowly, which is not engaging, potentially boring to listen to. So consider what the right pace and volume is for you that demonstrates your assertiveness. So I have some reflection questions for you, some action areas for you to think about coming out of this episode. And, the first question is, where and when have you doubted your level of assertiveness and whether you are coming across as aggressive? I think that's a really great question to ask yourself. And then coming to the approaches, where do you need to focus first to really make that impact to how you come across and show up in the meeting? Is it about setting your intention, your expectations, reminding yourself of your true value before that meeting? Is it about your messaging and having clarity? Or is it about signaling assertiveness, physically demonstrating it in the meeting? I'm really curious to know, and I love hearing from you, the listeners of this show. So please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, my personal profile, Victoria Reynoldson. And before we close up, I just want to remind you that if today's topic has resonated, there is a wealth of further leadership topics for future and current global leaders, which I would love to gift to you. This is a mini series of training, one short video a day that you can access in your own time. called Global Leader Impact, and you can access that at www.culturecuppa.com/leader. Thank you so much. It's been fantastic to explore this topic with you today, and I very much look forward to seeing you next time.